and welcome everybody to the first lecture in our Center for Historical Research series on revolutions. This will be the first of 8 talks we'll be hosting, and I hope to see some of you at our future talks. I'll tell you a little bit more about them at the end of the presentation today. But today we're very excited, obviously you are too, you're all here, to welcome Dr. Zheng to talk about a socialist feminist revolution in the early People's Republic of China. Dr. Wang received her PhD in history from the University of California, Davis. She's from Shanghai, and she returns to Shanghai every year and teaches a seminar, a transnational seminar on women's history in China and feminism in China. We were talking a little bit about, you could probably ask her something about that at the end of the talk during the question and answer period. Her research concerns feminism in China, both in terms of its historical development and its contemporary activism in global context, and the role of gender in state formation. She is the author of an oral history, a wonderful oral history of the Cultural Revolution, called Some of Us, Chinese Women Growing Up in the Mao Era, and her more recent work is Finding Women in the State, a Socialist Feminist Revolution in the People's Republic of China, 1949 to 1964. So join me in welcoming Dr. Wang Zheng.
Thank you, Dr. Noel, for your kind invitation. And I'm very excited to be here. This is my first visit to Ohio State. You guys impressed me. I have been given maybe more than hundreds of lectures, both in the US and in China. I go back to China every year promoting feminist studies in China. This is the first time in the lecture that there's so many male students here in my audience. Usually when I talk about feminism or women's history, always attract more female students. So I don't know, what's this indicator of Ohio State? You're more liberal than anywhere else?
Or highly evolved undergraduate population, perhaps?
Yeah, you're more advanced. Yeah. So I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to present my own research and engage the interested audience. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, great. Because I have to operate my laptop from this corner, so I cannot be centered. So some of you will be blocked by this big column in the middle. There are seats here, 2 more seats here. Okay, so, hey, can you have this light for me? Is that possible? No, all the light. Not just leave one for me to read my.
Do you guys
No?
turn off all the lights?
Is there a little light, reading light on here? No? No.
So maybe like this.
So maybe I use my cell phone? Turn it off. It's better for.
It's when you wanted to really see the pictures, I can turn off the lights.
I don't see a lot of pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, I'll show the pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of pictures. So it's okay. Let me try to. I have enough. Maybe I have enough batteries. Turn off the front. You leave the back, maybe still. Yeah. I want the audience to see the slides clearly. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay. Yeah, it's not bad. I still can read. Okay. So this talk addresses a hidden history of the socialist state feminist maneuvers behind the scenes in the Chinese Communist Party to promote women's liberation. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Chinese history or recent history of Chinese Revolution, but anyway, today you are going to have some knowledge, especially from a feminist perspective. Okay, I present you the history of Chinese Communist Revolution. There have been quite a lot of scholarly attention on the relationship between women and the communist revolution in China in the China studies. Previously, the central question was if the Communist Party liberated the Chinese women or not. That has been a central question for quite a while. The question contains some problematic assumptions that have long been unchallenged. The party, or later, the party state, has been assumed as a monolithic entity that takes on a male gender. Chinese women in this framing are obviously the oppressed, passively waiting for a savior. Such assumptions erase a long history of Chinese women's active participation in radical movements, including revolutions. In my recent book, I traced two cohorts of feminists who joined the Communist Revolution in the 1920s and the 1930s. Following their tenacious struggles after 1949, when they became part of the state power holders, my book presents findings of gender contentions in the high politics of the CCP, which I call a gender line in the party. Those who are in the China field will understand because Chinese party, Communist Party always talking about the class line of struggles. Nobody has ever talked about gender line. So that's my emphasis. So in this talk, I will discuss a few aspects of the hidden and unarticulated gender line of struggles in the socialist period and explore their implications. Please pay attention to my usage of the word, the socialist period. Even though today in the US public, the great majority of the US population will still think, oh, China is a socialist country. No, not in our definition, scholarly definition, okay? So the socialist period I'm talking about was history, not a reality anymore, all right? Let's start a brief background introduction to Chinese socialist state feminists. Feminism was one of the many ideologies that educated Chinese embraced in their pursuit of modernity and the rejection of an ancient dynastic system underpinned by a hierarchical sex-gender system. Some new people, no more seats? Okay. Just as the imagination of a modern China has never been singular, feminism has also been understood in diverse ways that nevertheless express a shared concern with gendered social arrangements. At the turn of the 20th century, anarchist, socialist, liberal, evolutionary, eugenic, and nationalist positions shaped various feminist articulations. Regardless of their diverse political positions, reformers, revolutionaries, professionals, and educated women and men from elite social backgrounds who embraced various versions of feminism agreed on the necessity of changing gender practices in transforming their ancient civilization, which had fallen into deep crisis in a time of imperialist and colonialist expansion. So I will not go back to the slides. Slides used as like outlines, highlights, okay? So you will read the slides to catch my key points. And usually I will not refer to my slides. So the confluence of diverse and often contradictory ideas and practices rapidly made a neologism a key phrase in 20th century China, that is equality between men and women. In Chinese, 男女平等. a Chinese rendition of the English phrase, sexual equality, that had been circulating globally since the late 19th century. So in other words, when sexual equality, this English phrase that came to China, it was first translated as 男女平等 or 男女平权. I think that translation was great because 男女, the Chinese word at the time, was used to translate sexual. 男女 I would think is the best Chinese equivalent word, phrase to sex gender system actually. But in the modern period, the term changes meanings. That's why when I came to translate gender, I didn't put it as 男女. Okay. So signifying a conscious rejection of the foundation of Confucian social order, prescribing differentiation between men and women, in Confucian saying is 男女有别, differentiation between men and women. Equality between men and women became a badge of modernity that social groups and the political parties adopted to assert a progressive identity. Okay? It has its function, utility function. Doesn't mean everybody embrace it totally, wholeheartedly, identify with this. Okay? You can use this slogan for different purposes. However, this phrase, equality between men and women, did become a badge of modernity. Okay? After the collapse of After the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911, educated women from elite families who had joined the revolution against the Qing government launched a women's suffrage movement to demand equal political rights in the new republic polity. So the modern China started with the first revolution that was revolution that toppled dynastic system. Or maybe we still have not really toppled. Okay. Suppressed by a dictatorial president in 1913, the suffragists, oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's great. That's great. Yeah. Okay, that's much easier. Thank you. So suppressed by a dictatorial president, Yuan Shikai, in 1913, the suffragists turned to women's education and careers to lay a social foundation for women's political rights. Radical male intellectuals launched a new culture movement in 1915 to challenge the dominant Confucianism, which provided a renewed critical feminist thrust. Gender hierarchy, gender differentiation, gender segregation, double sexual standards that demanded the chastity of women while legitimizing polygamy, and cultural practices ritualized in the service of maintaining a deeply entrenched hierarchical society that was fundamentally based on the dominance of men over women, were all highlighted as quintessentially symbols of the backwardness of Confucian culture, defined as feudalist. That was the content of New Culture movement. Feminism was enthusiastically embraced as a powerful weapon to combat the feudalism that had dominated China for millennia. The small circle of cultural radicals, which included future founders of the Chinese Communist Party, actually the initiator of New Culture movement, the Zheng later, a few years later, did become the founder of the Communist Party, the first party secretary, Cheng Du-xiu. So these small circle of cultural radicals rapidly expanded its social and intellectual influence. After May 4th, 1919, when college and secondary school students spearheaded a nationwide patriotic movement. incensed by the treaty signed by world powers at the Versailles Conference, that's after First World War, which transferred all of Germany's rights in Shandong province, that's in China, a northern province, in Shandong province to Japan after World War I. Your President Wilson was there, presiding over that conference. The May 4th movement, with its vehemently anti-imperialist female and male students as major constituents, became a powerful vehicle that carried new culture's advocacy of anti-feudalism, including the promotion of feminism into mainstream urban society. Equal education, now we are seeing these pictures of the first group of female college students, okay? Female students, okay, rose to the public scene. As I mentioned, Chinese society, being up to the 19th century, late 19th or beginning of 20th century, is still largely gender segregated society, meaning that decent women from decent families, not a lower class laboring woman, you do not step out of your house. You do not expose yourself to men's gaze, okay? So in the public space, usually there's male space. So the female students were the first group of students that got into the public space. So equal educational and employment opportunities for women and their freedom to socialize with men, ending centuries of gender segregation was seen as a foundation for women's liberation. Pursuing equality in all spheres of life and achieving an independent personhood, okay, became the hallmarks of the May 4th women's feminist subjectivities. Many May 4th feminists, by definition, educated women and men, later played important roles in China's political, social, and cultural transformations. This is the image of the May 4th female students in the 30s became another new social group, new terms for a newly emerging modern social group called the career women. So the 20s new students became 30s career women, right? In the urban settings, we're talking about small group, not in the rural areas. And we also see that, anybody can tell me what's your guess of this picture? Military women, okay? So these are the women who joined the communist revolution. And the communist revolution, in their long revolution, for one period, they retreated from their southern base area all the way, walked on foot for, close to how many miles in terms of about 10,000 Chinese miles to the northern base area. It's called the Long March, okay, in history called the Long March. And these were the women who joined the Long March and ended in the northern base area. Yeah. So there are different kinds of women. You just saw the urban career women, and you also saw women join the communist revolution in the same time period. Okay. So many May 4th feminists, they played important roles both in the urban settings and also in revolution, right? From two cohorts, older new culturalists and the younger students participants in the May 4th movement, emerged a small group of men and women disillusioned with the Western liberal but imperialist powers, who in 1921 formed the Communist Party. Okay, the Communist Party was founded in 1921, though even a small group, a Marxist study group, was formed in 1920. So this CCP was modeled after the newly founded Soviet Union. And the CCP openly endorsed equality between men and women in its platform. From day one, they incorporated equality between men and women. CCP feminists kept alive the many May 4th feminist agendas of women's liberation and mobilized women for the revolution with the new term, women work, 妇女工作 in Chinese. So this women work managed by a women department or a women work committee in various periods. Women work was a major platform for CCP feminists engaged in pursuing gendered social justice and equality, especially for lower class women, as well as an important branch of the CCP specialized in mobilizing women's participation in the communist revolution. You have to understand the extremely important role these communist women played in the whole process of communist revolution. Remember, I just mentioned the Chinese society was a gender segregated society. Men were not supposed to approach women. Okay? So only women can reach women. That's why these communist women were so important, that mobilization of all the millions of peasants women in vast rural areas, those kind of work is totally depending on communist women to mobilize, to organize door by door. Okay? So in urban areas, the underground, I have to introduce explain the term underground a little bit. In 1927, the coalition between Communist Party and the National Party was broken. And then the National Party started to suppress the Communist Party members, to arrest them. So the Communist Party, the members, they have to either go into the rural-based area that was controlled by the communist power. Communist Party established a power base in rural areas, very remote rural areas, or they have to go underground in the urban settings, because the urban settings were controlled by the Nationalist Party. Okay, so in urban areas, the underground of Chinese Communist Party feminists targeted women factory workers as the major constituents of women work. In the CCP's military bases in rural areas, peasant women were the target for feminist organization and mobilization. I have to say, I always encourage my students in China, young feminists, to learn Chinese communist revolutionary history in detail, to understand how, when they were fugitives, they were able to recruit a lot of members for the Communist Party. They recruited one by one. They mobilized peasant illiterate women one by one. Their success, the success of revolution, was relying on this minute, detailed care, and done by huge number of communist women, not just men. Okay. And running literacy classes and raising both class and gender consciousness were part of the women work among factory workers, and addressing abuse of women in patriarchal families, opposing arranged marriage, and promoting freedom to divorce were issues adopted by CCP feminists in rural-based areas. In the 1940s, the women work in the CCP rural power bases centered on enhancing women's economic status in rural families by encouraging them to participate in gainful productive work, which remained a priority on the agenda of women work in the early PRC. So the inner logic between the two-pronged agenda of women work was that in order for the CCP to succeed in attracting women to the communist revolution, which promised women's thorough emancipation down the road, the party had to address women's immediate and particular needs and interests. That's a practical gender interest you have to pay attention to. In practice, the two dimensions of women work presented an inherent source of tensions that required tremendous wisdom for the CCP feminists to juggle skillfully, as male leaders at all levels tended to treat institutionalized women work as an auxiliary instrument to fulfill various tasks of the party. After all, the wars against Japanese invaders and the Nationalist Party provided them with an excuse not to prioritize women's gender-specific interests, but instead to demand women's contribution to the revolution. We'll see that such internal power dynamics were conditioned strategies that socialist state feminists adopted in their transformed practices once the CCP took the state power. China in 1949 was an agrarian society with about 90% of its total population, 540 million, residing in rural areas, and 90% of women being illiterate, and an economy devastated by decades of wars. So economic recovery with women's participation and increasing women's literacy were high on the whole party's agenda for a socialist modernity. The victory of the CCP in 1949 enabled feminists in the party to wield socialist state power to materialize their feminist dreams. At least that was what they thought in that euphoric moment, okay? Because you always push these women's interests in the background, saying that, okay, we're fighting Japanese, and women's liberation will be totally realized after we establish socialist country. All right, so now the socialist state is founded, it's our moment. So there was a tremendous euphoric moment for feminists in the party. You could see from the face of these top 3 women leaders in China. Song Qinling was Madame Sun Yat-sen, that's the founding mother, the Republic China's, the President of Republic China's wife, so the first lady, founding mother. And in the middle, Deng Yingchao. Probably very few of you have heard of Deng Yingchao. Have you heard of Deng Yingchao? Anybody raise your hands? Deng Yingchao? Who is Deng Yingchao? Anybody can say? Who is Deng Yingchao? Huh? Wife of Zhou Enlai. Okay. How many of you know Zhou Enlai? Okay, a lot more know Zhou Enlai. Premier of the PRC. Okay, first premier of the PRC. And when I interviewed before feminists, some feminists told me that, oh, Deng Yingchao was very famous. She was leader of feminist alliances in Tianjin. You know, she was only 15. She was already leader, feminist leader. And we all know her. We didn't know Zhou Enlai at the time. So later, Zhou Enlai became famous. You know. Then she was totally eclipsed, okay? Hiding behind the scenes. All right. So then the other one is Cai Chang. Her husband also became, after PRC was founded, deputy premier, okay, of the PRC. All right. So, oh, that's when they look at the euphoric expression on their face. That was taken in December 1949. The PRC was formally founded on October 1st, 1949. December 1949, these women were already succeeded in hosting the International Conference of Women, that is the Asian Women's Congress in Beijing. Okay? Before the Communist China, the state established any diplomatic relationship with a lot of foreign countries. They already succeeded doing that. Okay. All right. So of the CCP membership of 4.449 million in 1949, over 530,000 were women. Many of these CCP women rose to official positions in administrations ranging from the central government to urban street offices and rural townships, depending on their party seniority and the level of education. Okay? If you have a college education and you join the party, let's say in the 30s, very likely you'll end up a position in the central government level. All right? If you have a secondary education and you join the party in the 1930s, the anti-Japanese invasion, that war, resistance of Japan, that war, and then you may end up in the provincial level, right? Government officials. So you have to understand when the Communist Party, this fugitive organization, now all of a sudden started to control the whole country, take over the whole thing. You have to staff all these bureaucratic positions in the government. Has Trump finished fill all his positions? Not yet, right? But he still has some vacancies. It's not easy to fill up all those government positions. So these women also got a lot of leadership positions, okay? We have to understand that. So although we do not claim that each CCP woman was a conscious feminist, the numbers and the power of Chinese socialist state feminists in the early PRC were arguably unprecedented in feminist histories of the world. This was a consequence of a feminist-informed communist revolution in the world's most populous nation that attracted female constituencies with equality between men and women as an integral goal of the revolution. The first National Women's Congress, organized by senior CCP feminists Deng Chao and Cai Chang, in March 1949, resolved to set up a national women's organization, All China Democratic Women's Federation. Later was renamed, and they dropped Democratic. So later became ACWF, okay, All China Women's Federation. It is an umbrella organization that horizontally united all pro-CCP women's organizations, and an official institution that vertically reached down to the rural villages and urban neighborhoods nationwide, okay? Down to neighborhoods, all right? No other so-called mass organization, this is a women's organization, is called mass, no other mass organization, other mass organizations were trade union and youth league, okay? The other two mass organizations, they are not the government branches, but are regarded as mass organizations. They do not have this kind of institutional reach, okay? But don't think that this kind of institutional building was ordered by the male party leaders. No. Actually, in each level of administration, the male leaders just hated the Women's Federation, thinking they're a nuisance. Okay? Several times they tried to disband them. Right? So I don't have time to get into all these struggles. So this vast organizational reach enabled the socialist state feminists to effectively carry out many transformative programs nationwide. But the institutional structure is flawed, from my view, in the ways that at each administration level, the Women's Federation is subordinated to the party boss of the same level. Okay? The party, the district committee, see that I said there's a structure of China, structure of Chinese state. You have the government, you have the party power structure, and I pair it with Women's Federation. But at each level, the party committee appointed the head of the same level, head of the Women's Federation. So this Women's Federation let's say it's a district level, is subordinate to the district party committee, okay? So this subordination is a huge problem, okay? So this structural subordination soon led to institutional marginalization of women's federation. So it was often, when they demanded the party boss to give resources, pay more attention to the work for women, like, oh, we want more resources for women's, such as illiteracy class, to erase illiteracy. We want to run classes, literacy classes for women. We need a classroom, we need a teachers, you need resources for women. And those district boss and party boss will usually say, no, that's, we don't have money for that, we don't have that. So usually that's kind of attitude. If you continue to plead to these male officials for this and for that, then you will be regarded as a nuisance. If you also raise criticism of them, hey, the party leader, you're the party leader, you are not paying attention to women's interests, you are not paying a lot of attention supporting gender equality between men and women. If you want to raise that kind of critical voice, gosh, you will be punished, okay? You will be demoted and you will be in trouble, all right? So we'll discuss this kind of problems, okay? We'll discuss how the women's federations, feminists in different levels, how do they handle this kind of structural subordination? How would they handle that? So let's take a look at the agenda. So the very first law adopted by the socialist state, the 1950 marriage law, drafted by a feminist committee led by Zheng. I introduced Zheng, okay? That was a centerpiece in the socialist feminist mission of transforming Chinese feudalist culture. Okay, I use their language, feudalist culture. The law enforced dismantling of traditional marriage practices such as arranged marriage. Do you all know the word arranged marriage? Sometimes, because our young students is far away from that kind of history. Sometimes I throw out some terminologies, assume that you all know what it is, but actually you do not. So do you understand? Anybody who need an explanation, arranged marriage? Okay, nobody knew that. That's great. Okay, so marriage historically in China and many other locations regarded as a business of two families. Okay, so parents have forcefully decided, oh, my son should marry your daughter, or your daughter should be my son's wife, to parents, like my parents. My parents their marriage was decided by my grandparents. Actually, my grandpas, two grandpas. Two grandpas drinking and they enjoyed each other and found out, oh, your son and your daughter is 2 years younger than my son. Okay, I like you. Okay, let them get married. Okay. My father tried to fight back and then he gave up when he discovered, oh, this woman is pretty okay. So that's the situation at the time. Okay. So this marriage law also abolished marriage practices such as underage marriage. Historically, Chinese people married at very young, 12, 13, you can't get married, okay? So they changed that. They raised to women 18, the age of 18, men 20 years old. And now later they changed it again. And granted women freedom to divorce and remarry. So this marriage law established the new gender norms of equality between men and women with state power, okay? So personal, independent personhood, that kind of May 4th idea, independent personhood, was emphasized in this marriage law, So the two parties got married, but you each has your independent personhood. So women do not take men's family names. Okay, so women born in PRC or people, all used to this kind of practice. When I came to the United States in 1985, I found, oh my gosh, you're so backward, here, women still taking their husband's names. What about your independent personhood? You say that your country of independence, what happened? After marriage, women lost their independent personhood. Where's your independence you claimed to have, I was very puzzled for a long while, Then I understood. Oh, thanks to those social state families in your law, marriage law 1950 is already prescribed. So nobody will change your own name, right? You keep your own name. So women's literacy, equal employment and equal pay, political participation, reproductive health, new public facilities to reduce working women's burden of childcare and housework were also areas of remarkable feminist achievements in the early PRC. Their efforts to involve and engage rural and urban lower class women, particularly in all the transformative programs aiming to eliminate class and gender hierarchies, expanded urban elite-based concepts and practices of women's rights from the first half of the 20th century. When I talk about May 4th feminists, at the time it's how far?
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, okay. I have to speed up. So in the May 4th, it's mostly concentrated these rights, concentrated among the urban settings, okay, educated population. But now with this state feminism, with their state power, they extended it to all the populations, right? These rights, equal rights. But if all the population can exercise those rights, that's another matter. That's another matter, right? Because at the same time, the socialist state paradoxically widen the gap between the rural and the urban by setting up a two-tier household registration system that offered urban residents more privileges and material goods in order to speed up industrialization. So from early on, the PRC actually practiced two-tier citizenship. It's extremely unequal institution, right? Socialist feminists, okay, let me see. Comprehensive vision of Chinese women's liberation crucially hinged on transformation of subjectivities. Senior feminists were acutely aware that without undoing a patriarchal culture that saturated the psyche of the people and the CCP members, efforts to achieve women's equality in all spheres of life would encounter severe obstacles and resistance. So cultural production was thus also an important realm in socialist feminist transformation, a heritage from the May 4th New Culture movement, when progressive intellectuals produced a massive amount of literature and drama to condemn a feudalist, as sometimes they use as feudalism, patriarchal culture tradition embodied in Confucianism. The Chinese term feudalism in socialist film, this is social film is a state-owned industry, of course, right? Led by female and male feminist leaders. So this term feudalism in films, in novels, operas, decidedly represented the other, feudalism as the other of socialist New China. It actually became a gender-inflected keyword, encompassing everything we today call sexism, masculinism, patriarchy, male chauvinism, or misogyny. These meanings all included in this one term, feudalism. Even illiterate women in the rural areas could deploy the term effortlessly to accuse men of chauvinism. Okay. So equality between men and women and women's liberation also became household slogans, intimately connecting gender equality with the authority of the new socialist state. A socialist feminist gender discourse rapidly rose to the mainstream discourse in the early PRC. I think now it's time for me to introduce a few feminists, state feminists, to my audience. You need to see some faces, okay? Not just the abstract notion of social feminist revolution. All right. So this is a Shanghai movie star, feminist, a writer, and also movie star Chen Bo. She joined the Communist Party in 1937 and went to Yan'an in 1938, leading a women's inspecting group to inspect women and children's situation in the war's base areas in the rural, in the north, Communist Party base areas, right? And also see that when Chen Bo was taking a picture of the women militia, all right, pay attention to the angle. She tried to elevate the subject of her photograph. And also this famous Yan'an Forum, 1942, when Mao met with intellectuals, artists who gathered in Yan'an and gave a famous talk on literature. And anybody can find out where's Chen Bo? Middle, right in the middle. She was very petite. Right in the middle, okay? Mao was there. Okay, I have some stuff to show. All right. That's Chen Bo, that's Chen Mao. That's Zhu De, the military commander-in-chief. All right. Okay, so you do not know Chen Bo. You never heard of Chen Bo before today, I'm sure. But you may have heard of Ding Ling. Anybody heard Ding Ling? Huh? You know Ding Ling, right? Yeah, Ding Ling was famous for her critique of sexism in the party. All right? And then later she became a rightist and condemning rightist. That's Ding Ling. All right? So Chen Bo enjoyed much more fame at the time than Ding Ling. Okay, so then after Second World War, Zheng Lai sent Chen Bo to Manchuria, to northeast China, that used to be occupied by Japanese. And Japan also ran the best film studio in Asia at the time, called Manchuria Film Studio. So Zheng Lai quickly sent Chen Bo to take over that Manchuria Film Studio. So that was in the middle. That was Chen Bo in the middle. She was the party secretary of Manchuria Film Studio. Later, it's renamed Changchun Dian Jianchang. Okay, she was the founder and the party secretary, and that's her husband. Also a movie star. The two played as lovers in the film, and so they were leading the film industry. That's the first state-run film studio. And later she also became the whole film industry, the leader of the whole film industry. Okay, so now when you have a feminist become the leader of the film industry, what will she do? Of course, she will produce a lot of feminist films. So under Chen Bo's leadership and active, heavy involvement in film production, from script writing to directing to cinematography, under her leadership and direct involvement, they produced the Manchuria Film Studio. By 1949, already produced a range of films. I would say that she created a socialist feminist paradigm for visual representation of revolutionary heroines. Okay, so that film, Daughters of China, was based on real story of women soldiers in resisting Japanese fascist troops in Manchuria, and then all were killed, martyred. That was a scene in that Daughters of China. That was 1949. They made this film to dedicate it to Asian Women's Congress happening in Beijing, right? And that was 1949. Remember that? Tons of movies of celebrating women's contribution to revolution, women's agency, strong-willed heroines in the revolutionary process. Tons of that kind of films produced down the road. I'm used to that kind of film. So when I came to the United States, I was very upset by Hollywood's sexist portrayal of women. So even, just contrast, that was the 1990s maybe, right? That film was 1990, The Fifth Element. Yeah, yeah. Okay. So in the U.S., I noticed with delight that starting from 21st century, you started to have heroine movies emerged. Probably the first one was Hunger Games. In the 21st century, Hollywood started to produce heroine films. But I don't feel that superiority because in the same time period, China is seeing a regression. We lost all those movies. And we started to have all those sexist representation of women. All right, let me speed up. Another cultural front is the magazine, Women of China. That's the first editor-in-chief, also a famous feminist in the Republican era. In the 1930s, she already started a magazine, Women's Life. And then after she was transferred to someone else, her successor, Dong Bian, became the editor-in-chief and ran Women of China, the only popular magazine, women's magazine in the early PRC, right? Large circulation. Okay, so Dong Bian served as editor-in-chief from 1956 to 1966, when the Cultural Revolution began. When her husband, that's her husband, okay? Her husband was Mao's secretary. The first one committed suicide in the political system, Xian Jiaying, and Dong Bian was implicated by that. And I want to show you all these young faces. Okay, these are the cadres of the Northwest Women's Federation, provincial level level officials. I want to show you the pictures because these women mostly have a secondary education, high school graduates who joined the revolution. And after 1949, they became provincial level officials. The two in the front later went to All China Women's Federation to work, and she later became the editor-in-chief of Women's Federation, Hou Di, of Women of China. And that's Li Qiyang, also worked in All China Women's Federation. Okay, so what's your impression of these communists? Very young. Very, very younger than you are, maybe, a lot of them, right? Okay, so let me go quickly because it's already late. So this is the cover images, the covers of the Women of China, right? As I say, this is a state feminist magazine. It's a magazine affiliated with All China Women's Federation. Right? I already introduced the editor-in-chief to you. So this is the first train locomotive operator, Tian Guiying, and the first one is the pilots. And this is the young captain in training. And the covers always use pictures. And the photographs, they always photograph the real women. Okay? Because at the time, Chinese society was a very sexist society. Nobody believed women can do anything. So they said, we have to use a real woman image to convince you that they can, all right? So they always use real women. And this young woman, I traced her, there's a picture. They have every woman on the cover, they have name, where they're from. So I remember this woman is Kong Qingfen. When I was looking at this image, that was 1954, she was young and receiving training, doing as an intern on the ship to be trained as a ship captain. Then in 1972, she became world first, I'm not sure if the only, women captain of ocean-going ships. Okay. These are real people, right? And the factory workers, welders. All right. So I want to show these images to show you that women were portrayed in these in the cover to show that they can do those jobs previously male-dominated, right? They try to convince women to do this, promoting these women who pioneered in these previously male-dominated jobs. I would regard it as a very feminist consciousness displayed here. But in case, when I presented my early research to audience, sometimes people still do not believe that, oh, communist women, they're just the pawns of the party, they are just robots, like receiving command from those male authorities. They will not have their own agency or initiative. They couldn't believe that a feminist conscious action didn't work. So I thought, okay, let me try to compare with other popular magazines at the same time, official, the magazines are all official, and to compare the visual representations of women in those magazines, then you will see what's going on, all right? So this is the Youth of China, another popular magazine, Youth of China. So in 1964, the state started to promote militia, especially after Chairman Mao wrote a poem about the women's militia. So all the media, official media, started to portray or extol women's militia. So you will see the images of women militia appear everywhere, all right? So it's very common. So now we see this Youth of China, okay, portraying women militia, all right? You read carefully. This is a little quiz, okay? I'll ask you. Little quiz, okay? So there's another image. This also portraying women militia. Anybody see any patterns here? Anybody see any patterns in this visual representation of women militia? No? Nobody can see anything? Great. What's your major? Sociology, good. You have taken gender studies classes maybe. Yes, that's why. Good for you. If you have not taken any gender study classes, you do not have gender perspective. You see, that's normal. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong. I don't see anything wrong. When I showed this picture to Xu Mei, who is an art editor responsible for cover of Women China, when I interviewed her, she was 85 years old. I showed this picture to her. She instantly said, giving prominence to men again. I would never have selected that picture. 85, okay? And so, okay, now let's see how Women of China represented women militia. Not subordinate to anybody. Don't take gender subordination as a norm. We do not subordinate to anybody. We have full autonomy. All right? Look at that one. Okay. These are all real women, and they were militia leaders also in the local areas. Okay. All right. So also I want to emphasize that when we're reading all these magazines, look at the covers, we ask, what are the intended audience of this magazine and the cover images, okay? For feminist meanings. Feminist meanings, what are we intended? They are not just the women. The intended audience were not just women. Not just women, or maybe some women had reservations to go into male-dominated spheres. So magazine try to give them courage or inspirations. Not just that. In fact, intended audience included male officials. All right? So this thing in 1951 at a central government conference for media and publishing of all those officials, she delivered a very sharp criticism of all the sexist phenomena she observed in the system, right? So, and so instead of, so she asked all the media people, officials responsible for so-called propaganda work, saying that you have to work hard to combat feudalism within, okay? So you have to, like everywhere people say, oh, women can't do nothing. You need to circulate the idea that women can do everything, anything, right? So she also hoped that all the media, not just a women's magazine, to criticize sex discrimination everywhere. So we see that Women of China, the magazine Women of China, constantly publicized critique of sexism of the officials. Like this one, 3 women are not equal to women. There's a title, a cartoon, okay, a satire of this guy. What kind of identity of this guy? Can you read the body language? It's a male official, okay? Kind of, male official boss. So this said, oh, I want to have one day in leave because I have a lot of housework I need to do, But I said, oh, you have a lot of housework, just resign, go home. The second woman said, oh, I want to have one day sick leave, right? I said, no sick leave, just resign. The third was obvious, she was pregnant. And said, oh, you're pregnant, you affect production, just resign. So finally she succeeded in driving all the women home, and she maintained the all-male space. So now we can guarantee our work. She was totally satisfied. That was the situation in the early PRC. The officials were the one, they blocked women's social advancement tremendously. So the feminists in the party, they have to fight the big feudalist mountain, okay, to remove the big feudalist mountain, both inside of the party and outside in the society. Tremendous task confronting them. All right? Okay. Okay, I may want to conclude. I would say that these daring feminist critical voices were silenced for a while in 1957 when the anti-rightist campaign was going on. In an atmosphere that any criticism could be taken as anti-party. State feminists could not even declare that their mission was to strive for women's liberation. You couldn't say that anymore in your work report. The party secretary, all the men, okay, party secretary, the members of party secretary questioned, interrogated these women, all China Women Federation's leaders, saying that they want to put a striving for women's liberation in their report, work report. Do you mean in socialist China, women are not yet liberated? You already got all the equality. What else do you want? Okay, these are verbatim quotations from their talks I found in the archives. All right. The unpredictable political campaigns launched by the party in the early PRC constantly got in the way of feminist pursuit of promoting women's social economic advancement. And often, such campaigns would become the political opportunity for the male chauvinist party leaders to discipline or punish outspoken women cadres who insist on the priority of women's interests. The subordination of the gender-based mass organization to the male-dominated party led to subsequent institutional marginalization of women in the state structure of the PRC, which in turn conditioned the routine experiences of feminists in the CCP that women work was of lesser value, except for those moments when some item on the party's central agenda required that women be mobilized. And historically, the CCP used the label of narrow bourgeois feminism as a political stick to beat down those outspoken feminists who insist on women's interests or raise a critical voice against the male chauvinism in the CCP. So in this historical context, state feminists in the Women's Federation system routinely operated in the politics of concealment. That's what I gave the name of their strategy in their endeavors to promote feminist agenda. Since singularly and openly raising a demand on behalf of women would have a slim chance of eliciting the support of male authorities, Women's Federation officials learned to insert feminist items into the party's agenda in order to gain legitimacy and resources for actions with a clear gender dimension. Okay? Articulating their strong support of the party's central tasks, state feminists often embedded a hidden script that intended to advance women's diverse interests. In other words, camouflaging a feminist agenda with dominant party language was a major principle in the politics of concealment. The concealing and self-effacing manner appealed to the authority of the party, but glossed over their own struggles behind the scenes. That's why they remained nameless. Nobody would know their historical actions. So they were receding into the shadows. Socialist and feminists were unknown to either the public in China or scholars outside China. Women's dramatic advancements in education, employment, and political participation in the socialist period was noticed by many observers outside China, but without any knowledge of state feminist endeavors. These observers generally attributed all the accomplishments to a patriarchy party state that supposedly showed sporadic benevolence to women. Okay? That's the usual previous explanation of Chinese women's social advancement in the socialist period. Okay? A dominant conceptualization of a monolithic party state in the field of China studies has disabled scholarly imaginations of possible feminist visions and contentions inside the socialist state. Okay. I have another point is about the politics of erasure, but I may have to stop here because it's already quite late. I would welcome your questions and see if some question related to that point, I'll address it. Otherwise, I may just stop here. Thank you very much.
So I'll let you take your own questions. So does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, anybody has any questions?
Any questions?
Yes?
Start. What sources did you use to uncover those sorts of inner voices?
I use archives. I use Shanghai Municipal Archives. And the Women's Federation's archive, I can only say quite complete because they did not open all the archives to all the time. Recent years, they even removed some archives, previous open. So I was lucky when I was doing the research that they opened more archives during that period. I started to do this since 1996. Yeah. And then also I interviewed. I interviewed over 20 women's federations of cadres. And they survived the ones from the first generation. like editors-in-chief, I try to meet them to hear their experiences. So it's oral history and archive. And also a lot of memoirs, I have to say, because that's actually in my last point, politics of erasure. Starting from Deng Xiaoping's regime, the Communist Party is still keeping the name, but actually already abandoned all the socialist practices, institutional mechanism, and everything, and only retained their political control. Okay, but they still name themselves socialism. So when they started to embrace global capitalism, the Chinese male intellectuals jumped on the bandwagon right away, started to critique the social period. They criticized Mao's dictatorship, okay? That's fine, yeah. A lot of mistakes, even evil deeds, crimes committed by the Communist Party in those first 30 years of socialist practices. But pretty soon, their critique just extended to everything, anything happened in those 30 years. So even gender equality, all those policies of guarantee equality between men and women now were criticized by these anti-socialist intellectuals and officials as a crime of ultra-leftist, okay? So why is it a crime? Because this kind of gender equality policy led to the alienation of Chinese women. You distorted human nature. You masculinized the Chinese women. At the same time, it masculinized the Chinese men. Okay? So now we have to restore our human nature. So let women be women, let men be men. Women should be more feminine women, men should be more masculine men. That's the natural order. Okay? So gender always became a focal point in this kind of drastic political changes and social changes. So in that kind of background, the first generation of these state feminists, of course they knew the whole society, all the discourse have changed rapidly. Now talking about the gender equality became a sign of backwardness. Became you're going back to Mao era, right? So they knew that before they practiced the politics of concealment, they didn't get a chance to go in the front stage, right? They have to operate behind the scenes. Now in their old age, they're all retired. They are not in their official positions anymore. They are retired. So in their retirement, all they're busy doing was producing memoirs. There are tons of memoirs, collected memoirs usually. So like Dong Bian, I admire this woman tremendously, the editor-in-chief worked there. She came back from the Cultural Revolution. She was banished for 10 years, and she was totally sick and old. But she spent all her retirement age compiling memoirs for other people, for other older than her. No, she joined the party in 1930s. She was compiling memoirs collected memoirs for communist women joined in 1920s. That's what she spent all her sick old age doing. Compiled just her daughters telling me she passed away. The books published by, she worked on and compiled by her desk, so much. But who would read them except for me? Because socialism already Mao became synonymous to socialism in the younger generation's mind. Socialism became horrible, everything is dark age, okay? Everything was bad, everything is done by Mao, as if Mao himself created everything, okay? And so all these women's history was totally erased. And nobody paid attention, nobody cared to learn anything about socialism. That's the post-socialist China. The dominant hegemonic discourse came into being. That became the historical knowledge for the younger generation Chinese. Okay? So it's so messed up, I would say. That's current situation, still going on. I have been trying hard to give lectures everywhere, until the book in its full shape. Then the scholars started to realize that, I'm not a follower of Mao. I think Mao is also sexist and patriarchal values, even though he also openly endorsed gender equality. Okay, but that doesn't mean in his mind he solved the problem of gender hierarchy. No. Yes.
We know the Me Too movement is very popular in the U.S. and it's tried to catch on in China, but recently we've seen now even like people suing women who are like Zheng with the TV broadcaster. He's suing the women that are publishing about the Me Too movement, and there's a lot of other famous domestic violence cases. How is the movement in China going now, or what do you think will
I have another slide with 70 images about the contemporary feminist movement up to today, the Me Too. Okay, that's a huge presentation over there. I can pull out from my laptop.
To make it simple, like, what do you think is the biggest obstacles for Me Too becoming more popular?
Biggest obstacle, let me tell you. First of all, it's not to follow. Chinese Me Too is not an emulation of US Me Too. No. In China, feminists start to work on sexual harassment and sexual violence against women. I would say the popular event, the event got the most publicized was a 2012 event called Deng Yuzhou. I do not know if anybody knows. Deng Yuzhou was a woman worked in public bathplace. It's kind of semi-sex service industry, The men going there expecting some sexual service, but this woman was not doing that. She was not a sex worker. But then the local official came, demanded sex, almost wanted to rape her. So she resisted. She has a little knife, keeping by her side. So she stabbed. One official was wounded, the other official was killed. And then became an uproar. And public just totally in the support of this young woman. All right? We do not know what happened to her later on. But anyway, that was the first publicized event of a woman resisted sexual violence. All right? And then women started to, and also feminists came to her support. Young students from Women's College in Beijing, they staged performance action. They tied them up with the white gauze and then lying down and saying that we are so tired, we are just, our mouth is sealed, we couldn't raise our voice, we couldn't fight back, stuff like that. And then 2013, I think I don't have my slides on that, my numbers may not accurate, but 2013, so another feminist action against sexual violence and sexual harassment, that was Haining. Elementary school principal pimped 5th grade students to local officials and then got exposed. And feminists ran to theirs in Hainan Island to demand the government's punishment of all involved villains. These young girls we're talking about. And later we found it's very prevalent in China because those officials, they have chastity fetish in China, okay? So they want virgin women. So now because sexual norms changed, young men and women started to have sex much earlier, and before marriage and beyond marriage, all kind of stuff going on. So the officials feel they have to go further younger, to elementary school, to look for a real virgin. So real virgins at that age can sell at a high value. So the principal pimped his students. So feminists went there, and then the leading feminists went there, and at the time, we have all the pictures, images. the media supported, the social media or online, you can find a lot of that kind of images. Ye Haiyan was the leading one, okay? She was holding a sign, feminist, holding a sign saying that principal, open the hotel room with me. Okay, that's a euphemism. When those officials, they want to force this woman to have sex, they went to the hotel to open the room. So open the hotel room with me, let go of these young students. Big sign, that's another performance action. It's circulating online, you check it, it's everywhere. And that action was made into a documentary film, Hooligan Sparrow. Yeah, you should all use that in your classroom, I highly recommend it. And she was suppressed, she was put in jail, she was harassed by police and put in jail and driven out of her apartment, the whole horrible situation. All right, that's feminist action for you. And then, of course, 2015, the Feminist 5, how many of you know Feminist 5? Raise hand if you know.
I've heard of
You heard about that. The other students too young to know things happening in 2015. Feminist 5, get online to check the Feminist 5. So 5 young feminists, they continued anti-sexual harassment on the, no, I shall go back. 2013, a group of young feminists went on Shanghai subway and holding signs saying that I can be sexy, you cannot harass. Okay? It's anti-sexual harassment. Why did it happen in the public transportation? Like buses and the subways everywhere. So they hold a sign. That's 2013. And then 2015, the young feminists said, we still want to do that. So for March the 8th, International Women's Day, we will put posters on public transportations as our action, feminist action, to commemorate the March the 8th International Women's Day. I know this Women's Day is not what you observe, but in China it's a national day. Women got a day off and got presents. That's a heritage of state feminism. Okay, so all the previous socialist countries honor International Women's Day, right? Okay, that's another history that you do not get to know. All right, that's what I have been working on. And other historians are working on the socialist feminists, global-wise, their history. Okay. Some of for you, if you're interested, you can join this kind of intellectual endeavor to get that history out. Okay, so March the 8th, right? On March 7th, they were located in different cities. And they were detained, arrested, dragged from their bed, police broke into their dorms and their rooms and arrested them. And before they were able to put on the stickers. And then of course we mobilized global support, there's uproar. So finally in the end we were able to collect over 2 million signatures global-wise to demand the release of the feminist fight. So after 37 days they were released. Okay, that's the success of global feminist action. Okay. And then they still continue their efforts. 2017, if you have time, if you're really interested, I can pull some images out. I'm not sure it'll take too long for you to, over 70 images. And then 2017, another young feminist continued anti-sexual harassment efforts. And at the beginning of the year, she started to say that, okay, let me do the fundraising. Let's buy an advertisement space in the subway. Then we can put up a poster for anti-sexual harassment in the subway. Continue these long efforts. And then very soon she was able to raise 40,000 yuan for that spot. So she took the money and took the design of the poster to the local government. Then she went to one government branch, to another, one to another. Each one she was rejected. Saying that no individual, you cannot do that. Only the government official, the branches can do that. You cannot do that. So she was mad and she thought, okay, let me just do a mobile one. I just carry it. She put it on the board, the postable board, and she carried it everywhere she goes. And take pictures, put online. It's more interesting for me to show you the pictures, actually. And then she circulated this poster, it's an electronic file, basically. So over 100 university students started to join the efforts, and then putting on this moving billboard, in a sense. You carry on bag, you put it in the front, you put on your bicycle, you put it anywhere you go, all right? Then the police noticed, okay, this is organized. If it's circulating across different regions, obviously, somebody in the back organized. So Zheng, that's the first feminist, she was behind that. So then police visited her, and the Chinese police has a routine way of handling, harassing these young students, young activists. That is, the young students in China nowadays, most of them are single child, either single daughter or single son, or one-child policy. And they heavily rely on their parents for support, right? For education, for everything. And so the relationship was always very close. So they were first, okay, the procedure is this way. Usually those young students working in somewhere, they will not own the property, right? You cannot buy a house or apartment. So you pay for the rent, right? So then the police will talk to your landlord or landlady. So these are bad people, drive them out. So the landlord was forced. Say, hey, tomorrow you have to evacuate. So that's often happened to these feminists. So Zhang Lei and the others, they shared one apartment building, they were driven out constantly. That's not bad, not worse, because you can share a place, find a friend to stay for a few days, find another location to stay. If the police are okay, that did not deter you. I will tell your parents. Drive your parents. I will inform your parents your wrongdoings. Okay. So how to frame their crimes? Imagine they're wonderful citizens. Then you see the police will say, oh, your daughter, is in the trap of those overseas hostile forces. They try to sabotage the Chinese state and government. Your daughter is in that, stop her doing that. So the parents are so scared, and of course parents are okay, put the person crying, all kinds of stuff, and put pressure on the young feminists. In most cases, young feminists say, okay. And next, when the parents are back, they will continue their efforts. But that's the situation. But starting from this year, the Me Too started to have some impact because a Chinese student, graduate student, originally studied in the University of Beijing and then came to the US, pursuing PhD, then found a job here, influenced by, impacted, inspired by Me Too here, then noticed that her supervisors back in university keeping harassing younger students. The same one who harassed her made her depressed to such extent she had to say goodbye. I have to come to the United States. I cannot study here anymore. So this year came out as the first one with her real identity exposed, and also naming that professor. Okay. So then after that, one after another, women came out with that real, saying I am the one who was harassed. And so there's feminists jumping on that and started to have a nationwide campaign and encouraging alumni to sign petition letters to their respective universities. Because you cannot ask students in the university to do that. Because they are professors, they are all those monitors, they have special position officials monitoring students' behaviors. They'll come out to give you pressure. So in the universities, they cannot openly do anything. So feminists mobilized alumni. So close to 100 universities alumni signed petition letters to respective university administrators demanding setting up anti-sexual harassment institutional mechanisms besides punishing the very professors or faculty members who committed that crime. Okay? But so far, in one location, they started to consider setting up anti-sexual harassment mechanism, but still, the whole higher education in China, they haven't done anything. And rather, because of this very coordinated petition signing police notice, some organization behind that organized activities. So this year, 2018, for the National Security Police, feminists are the focus of their political control. Okay, that's the situation.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to end on that note because it's 4:30. But Professor Wang has agreed to stay on and talk
I'll
informally
talk
to
to the
anybody who
students
wants
who are
to continue the
interested in
conversation.
yeah.
So we'll be here, but I know some of you need to leave.